The blood on her dress had frozen into dark crimson patches by the time Delilah Ramsey stumbled onto the porch of the ranch house, her bare feet leaving faint pink prints in the fresh snow that had begun to fall over the Nevada territory just after sunset. She had been running for 3 days straight, hiding in caves and under rocky outcrops, drinking from half-frozen streams, and now her body had simply given out. The warmth radiating from behind the wooden door called to her like a siren song, and she pressed her frozen fingers against the rough timber, trying to summon the strength to knock. Her teeth chattered so violently that she thought they might shatter, and her vision swam with dark spots that threatened to pull her under completely. Inside, Samuel Brennan had just finished cleaning his rifle when he heard the soft thump against his front door. He froze, listening. Out here in the high desert hills north of Goldfield, Nevada, unexpected visitors in December of 1881 were rarely good news. The mines had brought every kind of person to this corner of the world, and not all of them had honest intentions. He set the rifle down carefully and moved toward the door, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. When he pulled the door open, he expected to see a drifter or maybe one of the miners from town looking for shelter from the unexpected snowstorm. What he did not expect was the woman who collapsed forward into his arms, her body shaking so hard he could feel it through his shirt. Samuel caught her instinctively, his strong arms wrapping around her thin frame as he staggered back a step under the sudden weight. She was light, too light, and when he looked down at her face, he saw lips tinged blue and skin so pale it looked translucent in the lamplight. Her dark hair hung in tangled ropes around her shoulders, matted with dirt and what looked like dried blood. His heart, which he had carefully guarded for the past 5 years since returning from working cattle drives through Montana, lurched in his chest with an unfamiliar sensation that was part concern and part something else entirely. "Christ Almighty," he muttered, kicking the door shut behind him with his boot heel. He carried her to the chair nearest the fireplace and set her down as gently as he could. Her eyes fluttered open for just a moment, revealing irises the color of honey before closing again. He grabbed the blanket from the back of his reading chair and wrapped it around her shoulders, then knelt down to examine her feet. They were torn and bloody, the skin raw from running across the rocky desert floor. The blood on her dress looked old, but he could not tell if it was hers or someone else's. Samuel had seen his share of trouble in his 32 years. He had worked cattle from Texas to Montana, survived stampedes and rattlesnake bites, lost friends to gunfights and disease, and carved out this small ranch on the edge of nowhere through sheer determination and backbreaking work. He had learned to mind his own business and keep his head down, especially in a territory as wild as Nevada, where the law was often whatever the man with the fastest draw said it was. But looking at this woman shivering in his chair, her fingers curled into claws from the cold, he knew he could not turn her away. Something in those honey-colored eyes, even in that brief glimpse, had reached past all his defenses and grabbed hold of something he thought he had buried for good. He moved quickly, building up the fire until it roared in the hearth, then heating water in his largest pot. While the water warmed, he pulled out clean cloths and the medical supplies he kept in a wooden box under his bed. Living this far from town meant being prepared to handle injuries on your own. He had stitched up horses, cattle, and even himself on more than one occasion. When the water was warm enough, he knelt beside her again and carefully began to clean the wounds on her feet. She stirred at his touch, her eyes opening wide with panic. She tried to pull away, a small sound of fear escaping her throat. "Easy now," Samuel said, keeping his voice low and steady the way he did with spooked horses. "You are safe here. I'm just trying to help with these feet of yours. They are torn up pretty bad." Delilah stared at him through the haze of exhaustion and cold that clouded her mind. She saw a man with dark hair that fell just past his collar, a strong jaw shadowed with several days' worth of beard, and eyes that were a startling shade of gray-green. He wore a simple cotton shirt rolled up at the sleeves, revealing forearms corded with muscle, and his hands, though large and work-roughened, moved with surprising gentleness as he cleaned the cuts on her feet. She wanted to speak, to thank him or warn him or something, but her teeth were still chattering too hard to form words. Samuel saw her struggling and shook his head. "Do not try to talk yet. Let me get you warmed up first. Can you drink something?" When she managed a small nod, he stood and poured hot coffee into a tin cup, adding a generous spoonful of sugar and a splash of whiskey. He brought it to her lips and helped her take small sips, steadying the cup with his hand over hers. The warmth of the liquid seemed to bring some life back into her, and after a few minutes, the violent shaking subsided to occasional tremors. "Thank you," she finally managed to whisper, her voice rough and cracked. "What happened to you?" Samuel asked, settling back on his heels. "Who did you run from?" Delilah closed her eyes, and for a moment he thought she might not answer. Then she took a shaky breath and said, "My husband. Former husband. He is dead now, but his brothers are not. They blame me for what happened, and they want me dead too." Samuel had suspected something like that, but hearing it confirmed made his jaw tighten. He had no patience for men who hurt women, and even less for those who hunted them down like animals. "What is your name?" "Delilah Ramsey. My maiden name, anyway. I took it back after he died." "Samuel Brennan. This is my ranch, such as it is. You are welcome to stay as long as you need." The words came out before he had fully thought them through, but once they were spoken, he knew he meant them. There was something about this woman that called to him, something beyond the obvious need for help. He pushed that thought aside for now and focused on the practical matters at hand. "How long since you ate anything?" 2 days, maybe 3. I lost track." He nodded and stood, moving to his small kitchen area. He had beef stew simmering on the stove, having made a large pot the day before, and he ladled a bowl full for her. She ate slowly at first, then with increasing hunger, and he refilled the bowl twice before she finally sat back with a sigh. Color had begun to return to her cheeks, and her hands had steadied enough that she could hold the spoon herself. "The blood on your dress," Samuel said carefully. "Is it yours?" "Some of it. Most of it belonged to a man who tried to stop me in Virginia City. He worked for my husband's brothers. I had a knife, and I used it." She met his eyes steadily, and he saw no shame there, only a fierce determination to survive. "I will not apologize for defending myself. I would not ask you to." Samuel poured himself a cup of coffee and sat down in the chair across from her. "Virginia City is near 100 miles from here. You traveled all that way on foot." "I stole a horse at first, but it went lame 2 days ago. I had to leave it. I have been walking since then." She pulled the blanket tighter around herself. "I saw the light from your window, and I just hoped that whoever lived here might be decent enough not to turn me away." "How old are you, if you do not mind me asking?" 26. Old enough to have made some terrible mistakes and young enough to maybe get a chance to fix them. She looked around the cabin, taking in the simple furnishings and the neat way everything was arranged. "You live here alone?" "For the past 3 years. I have about 200 acres, mostly scrub and rocks, but there is good grazing in the valleys and a year-round creek. I run about 50 head of cattle, some horses. It is not much, but it is mine, and I owe no man for it." Delilah heard the pride in his voice and understood it. In a world where most people were beholden to someone else, true independence was rare and precious. "I have put you in danger by coming here. If the Hutchins brothers find me, they will not care who gets hurt in the process." Samuel considered this for a moment, then shrugged. "I have faced down rustlers, claim jumpers, and a pack of wolves that tried to get at my cattle last winter. I am not scared of some angry men from Virginia City. Besides, the snow is coming down hard now. Even if they were tracking you, they will have lost your trail. You will be safe here for tonight at least, and we can figure out what to do in the morning." She wanted to argue, to insist that she would leave as soon as she had rested, but exhaustion crashed over her like a wave. Her eyes grew heavy, and she found herself struggling to keep them open. Samuel saw her fading and made a quick decision. He scooped her up from the chair, blanket and all, and carried her to his bed in the small room that served as his bedroom. She did not even protest, simply turned her face into his shoulder with a sigh that made something in his chest tighten. He laid her on the bed and pulled the quilts up over her, then stepped back. She was already asleep, her breathing deep and even. He stood there for a long moment, studying her face in the dim light that filtered in from the main room. Even bruised and dirty, she was beautiful in a way that made his throat go dry. Her features had a delicate quality that contrasted sharply with the obvious strength and determination she had shown. He found himself wondering what her smile looked like, what her voice sounded like when she was not half dead from cold and exhaustion. Samuel shook his head at his own foolishness and returned to the main room. He would sleep in the chair by the fire tonight, keeping watch in case the brothers she had mentioned somehow managed to track her through the storm. He checked his rifle and pistol, making sure both were loaded and within easy reach, then settled into the chair with another cup of coffee. Outside, the wind picked up, howling around the corners of the cabin and driving the snow against the windows in soft, pattering waves. It was going to be a long night. He must have dozed off sometime before dawn, because he woke to the sound of movement in the bedroom. He was on his feet instantly, hand on his pistol, before his sleep-fogged brain recognized the sounds as non-threatening. A moment later, Delilah appeared in the doorway, wrapped in one of his quilts and limping slightly on her injured feet. "I am sorry," she said softly. "I did not mean to wake you. I just needed to use the outhouse. It is around the back of the cabin, but you should not go out there barefoot. Your feet need time to heal." He rummaged through his trunk and pulled out a pair of wool socks and some old boots that had belonged to his younger brother before he headed east to San Francisco. "These might be too big, but they are better than nothing." Delilah took the socks and boots gratefully, sitting down to pull them on. The boots were indeed too large, but the extra socks helped, and she managed to shuffle toward the door. Samuel held up a hand to stop her and shrugged into his coat. "I will walk you out. The snow drifted last night and it is easy to lose your way." He did not mention that he also wanted to make sure no one had come during the night, though he kept his eyes on the surrounding landscape as they made their way through the ankle-deep snow to the small outhouse behind the cabin. The storm had passed, leaving behind a crystalline world of white that sparkled in the early morning sun. There were no tracks except those made by rabbits and a coyote, and Samuel allowed himself to relax slightly. When they returned to the cabin, he stoked the fire and set about making breakfast. He fried salt pork and potatoes in his cast-iron skillet and made fresh coffee, working with the easy efficiency of a man long accustomed to taking care of himself. Delilah watched him from her place by the fire, grateful for the warmth and the smell of food cooking. She had almost forgotten what it felt like to be safe, to not have to constantly look over her shoulder or sleep with a knife in her hand. "Tell me about your husband," Samuel said as they ate. "If you want to, that is." Delilah was quiet for a moment, pushing potatoes around on her plate. Then she began to speak, her voice low and steady. "His name was Marcus Hutchins. I met him in Carson City 4 years ago when I was working as a seamstress. He was charming and handsome, and he said all the right things. By the time I realized what he really was, we were already married and he had made it clear that leaving was not an option. Samuel's hands tightened on his fork, but he said nothing, letting her continue at her own pace. He was involved in things, bad things. Claim jumping, theft, maybe worse. I tried not to know the details because that seemed safer. His brothers, Garrett and Thomas, they were part of it too. The three of them ran things in Virginia City like they owned the place, and maybe they did. The law there looks the other way if you have enough money. She took a sip of coffee, her hands trembling slightly. 6 months ago, Marcus got into a fight with a mine owner over some disputed land. He came home drunk and angry, and he took it out on me the way he always did when things went wrong. But this time was different. This time I fought back. Samuel's jaw clenched, but he kept his voice gentle. What happened? He had his gun on the table. We struggled and it went off. The bullet caught him in the chest and he died right there on our kitchen floor. She met Samuel's eyes, her own filled with a complex mixture of grief, guilt, and relief. I did not mean to kill him, but I cannot say I am sorry he is dead. Does that make me a terrible person? No, Samuel said firmly. It makes you a survivor. What happened after? The marshal ruled it self-defense. Marcus had hit me before and half the town knew it, but his brothers did not accept it. They said I murdered him for his money, even though there was not much left. They have been hunting me ever since, forcing me to run from town to town. I thought maybe if I got far enough away they would give up, but they keep coming. Samuel pushed his plate aside and leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. Goldfield is about 30 miles south of here. It is a mining town growing fast. There is a marshal there, a man named Tom Whitaker. He is honest, which is saying something in these parts. We could ride down there, get him involved. Do you really think that would help? The Hutchins brothers have money and connections. What does the law matter to men like that? It matters because men like Tom Whitaker make it matter. And because you have done nothing wrong. Running forever is no kind of life, Delilah. Eventually, you have to stand and fight. She studied him for a long moment, taking in the determination in his eyes and the set of his jaw. This man, who had known her for less than 24 hours, was willing to help her fight her battles. The realization brought tears to her eyes and she blinked them back rapidly. Why are you doing this? You do not know me. You do not owe me anything. Samuel was silent for a moment, considering his answer carefully. He could give her the practical reasons, talk about justice and doing the right thing, but the truth was more complicated than that. From the moment she had fallen into his arms, something had shifted inside him. The careful walls he had built around his heart had developed cracks, and he could feel something warm and unfamiliar seeping through. Maybe I am tired of living alone, he said finally. Maybe I see someone who needs help and I have the means to give it. Or maybe I just know that some things are worth fighting for, and you are one of them. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning that neither of them was quite ready to examine too closely. Delilah felt her breath catch in her throat, and when she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I do not want to bring trouble to your door, Samuel. Trouble has a way of finding people whether they invite it or not. At least this way we face it together. He stood and began clearing the dishes, needing something to do with his hands. The snow will make travel difficult for a few days. You should rest and let your feet heal. When the trail's clear, we will ride to Goldfield and talk to Marshal Whitaker. Over the next 3 days, they settled into an unexpected routine. Samuel tended to his cattle and horses, checking on them despite the cold and making sure they had enough feed to get through the winter. Delilah helped where she could, cooking meals and mending the tears in his shirts and blankets that he had been ignoring for months. Her presence transformed the cabin from a simple shelter into something that felt almost like a home, and Samuel found himself looking forward to coming in from the cold to find her there, usually sitting by the fire with her sewing or reading one of his few books. They talked during those long winter evenings, sharing stories about their lives. Samuel told her about growing up on a farm in Missouri, about his parents who had died of fever when he was 19, about his years working cattle drives and saving every penny until he could afford to buy this land. Delilah spoke of her childhood in Sacramento, of her mother who had died when she was young and her father who had remarried and started a new family, leaving Delilah to make her own way in the world. She had learned sewing from a kind woman who ran a dress shop, and for a while she had been happy with her simple life. "I thought Marcus was my chance at something more," she said one evening as they sat by the fire. "I was foolish and naive, and I paid for it. You were not foolish. You were hopeful, and there is nothing wrong with that. He is the one who failed you, not the other way around." Samuel set down the piece of leather he had been working into a new bridle and looked at her. "What would you do if you could do anything? If the Hutchins brothers were not a problem, if you could start fresh anywhere, what would you want?" Delilah considered the question, her fingers stilling on the shirt she was mending. "I would want a place to call my own. Not much, maybe just a small house with a garden where I could grow vegetables and flowers. I would want to wake up without being afraid, to go to sleep without nightmares. I would want to matter to someone, to build something real with someone who saw me as a partner, not property." She glanced at him, her cheeks coloring slightly. "That probably sounds silly." "It sounds perfect," Samuel said, and he meant it. As she described her dream, he found himself imagining it too, picturing her in a garden behind this very cabin, picturing them building that life together. The thought should have scared him, should have sent him retreating behind his carefully constructed walls, but instead it felt right in a way that nothing had felt right in years. That night, after Delilah had gone to bed, Samuel stood at the window and looked out at the moonlit snow. He was 32 years old, and he had spent the last decade of his life focused on survival and building his ranch. He had told himself that he did not need anyone else, that solitude was safer than risking his heart. But 3 days with Delilah had shown him what a lie that was. He did need someone. He needed her. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating, and he found himself grinning like a fool at his own reflection in the dark glass. On the 4th day after Delilah's arrival, the weather cleared enough for travel. Samuel saddled his 2 best horses, a steady bay gelding for himself and a gentler mare for Delilah. He packed supplies for the journey and made sure his rifle was secure in its scabbard. The ride to Goldfield would take most of the day, and while he did not expect trouble, he believed in being prepared. Delilah came out of the cabin wearing a dress she had mended and cleaned as best she could. Along with a coat Samuel had given her that had belonged to his mother. It was too big for her slight frame, but it was warm and well made. She had braided her dark hair to keep it out of her face, and in the bright morning sunlight, Samuel could see the bruises on her cheekbones were fading to yellow-green. She looked stronger than she had when she arrived, more like herself, and the change made his heart beat faster. "Ready?" he asked, offering his hand to help her mount. "As I will ever be," she replied, accepting his assistance. The mare shifted beneath her, and Samuel steadied the horse with a practiced hand on the reins. They rode south through a landscape transformed by snow. The high desert, usually brown and austere, sparkled white under the winter sun. They followed the trail that wound through the rocky hills, taking their time and stopping twice to rest the horses. Samuel kept a watchful eye on the surrounding terrain, looking for any sign that they were being followed, but the land remained empty and still. As they rode, they talked about small things at first, then gradually moved to deeper topics. Delilah asked about his time on the cattle drives, and Samuel found himself telling her stories he had not shared with anyone. He spoke of pushing thousands of head of cattle from Texas to Montana, of sleeping under the stars and eating dust, of thunderstorms that turned the herd into a stampeding mass of terror. He told her about the men he had worked with, some good and some bad, and about the loneliness of that life. "Why did you stop?" Delilah asked. "The way you talk about it, it sounds like you loved it despite the hardships." "I did love it, but it was not a life you can sustain forever. Men age fast on the trail, and I wanted something permanent, something that was mine. I wanted roots." He glanced at her. "What about you? What did you love about sewing, creating something beautiful from nothing, taking fabric and thread and making something that made people feel good about themselves? There is a kind of magic in that, even if it is small magic." She smiled, the first genuine smile he had seen from her, and it transformed her face completely. "I made a wedding dress once for a woman who cried when she saw it. She said it was exactly what she had dreamed of. That feeling, knowing I had made someone that happy, it was better than any money I could have earned." Samuel found himself staring at that smile, committing it to memory. He had been right to wonder about it that first night. It was radiant, lighting up her entire face and making her eyes sparkle. He wanted to see her smile like that every day for the rest of his life, and the intensity of that desire nearly made him rein in his horse from the shock of it. They reached Goldfield in the late afternoon. The town had grown considerably since Samuel's last visit 6 months earlier. The gold and silver strikes had brought hundreds of people flooding in, and the main street was crowded with saloons, supply stores, assay offices, and hotels. The sound of construction filled the air as new buildings went up to accommodate the rush of prospectors and businessmen seeking their fortunes. Samuel led them straight to the marshal's office, a solid building near the center of town. He helped Delilah dismount and tied the horses to the hitching post, then ushered her inside. Marshal Tom Whitaker looked up from his desk as they entered. He was a big man in his mid-40s, with a weathered face and sharp gray eyes that missed nothing. He had been a lawman in Kansas and Colorado before settling in Goldfield, and he had a reputation for fairness and competence that was rare in boom towns. "Samuel Brennan," the marshal said, rising to shake Samuel's hand. "Been a while since I saw you in town. What brings you here?" "This is Delilah Ramsey, Marshal. She needs your help, and I figure you are about the only lawman within 100 miles who might be willing to give it." Samuel gestured to the chairs in front of the desk, and they all sat down. Delilah told her story again, this time including more details about the Hutchins brothers and their operations in Virginia City. Marshal Whitaker listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker as she spoke. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair and let out a long breath. "I have heard of the Hutchins brothers. They have a bad reputation, even by Virginia City standards. If half of what I have heard is true, they should have been locked up years ago." He looked at Delilah with sympathy. "I am sorry for what you have been through, Miss Ramsey. The question is, what can we do about it? Can you offer her protection?" Samuel asked. "Keep them away from her. My jurisdiction ends at the town limits, and I have only 2 deputies. If these men come looking for her here, I can arrest them if they break the law, but I cannot guarantee her safety beyond that." He drummed his fingers on the desk, thinking, "What we need is to end this permanently. The marshal in Virginia City is in the Hutchins family's pocket, so we cannot count on him. But if we had evidence of their other crimes, real evidence, I could send it to the territorial governor. He has been making noise about cleaning up corruption in the mining districts. This might be exactly the kind of case he would take interest in. What kind of evidence? Delilah asked. Documents, ledgers, witness testimony. Anything that proves they are involved in illegal activities. Do you know where they might keep records of their operations? Delilah thought for a moment, then nodded slowly. Marcus had an office in our house where he kept papers. After he died, I did not go through them much. I was too scared, but Garrett has been living there since, and if Marcus kept records, they might still be there. That is in Virginia City, Samuel said flatly. You are not suggesting she go back there. No, I am not suggesting that at all. Marshal Whitaker stood and walked to the window, looking out at the busy street. But if someone could get those documents and bring them here, we might have a case. I know a few deputies up in Virginia City, honest men who do not take bribes. I could send a telegram, see if one of them would be willing to search the house with a warrant. Would a judge there issue a warrant against the Hutchins family? Delilah's voice was skeptical. Probably not. But a judge here might, if the victim of their harassment is under my protection in my jurisdiction. The marshal turned back to them with a slight smile. The law can be creative when it needs to be, Miss Ramsey. Let me work on this. In the meantime, where are you staying? Samuel stood. She is staying at my ranch for now. We will come back in a few days to see what you have found out. Marshal Whitaker nodded approvingly. Your place is remote enough that they would have a hard time finding it even if they managed to track her to the area. Keep her safe, Samuel. I will do what I can from here. They left the marshal's office and walked the horses down to the livery stable, where Samuel arranged for them to be fed and watered while he and Delilah got supplies. The general store was crowded with miners stocking up, but the owner, a woman named Martha Chen who had come over from China during the railroad construction, recognized Samuel and gave them prompt service. Samuel bought flour, sugar, coffee, and other staples, as well as a few items he normally would not have splurged on, including a tin of peaches and some peppermint sticks. He saw Delilah looking at a bolt of blue calico fabric and added that to their purchases as well, along with thread and needles. You did not have to do that, Delilah said as they loaded the supplies onto the horses. I know. But you will need something better than that one dress, and I figure you can make yourself whatever you want with that fabric. Consider it payment for all the cooking and mending you have been doing. He said it lightly, but the look in his eyes was warm and intense, and Delilah felt her cheeks heat. They started the ride back as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The temperature dropped rapidly once the sun disappeared below the horizon, and Samuel pushed them to maintain a steady pace. They were about halfway back to the ranch when Samuel suddenly pulled his horse to a stop, his hand going to his rifle. Delilah halted beside him, her heart suddenly pounding. "What is it?" she whispered. "Riders behind us, 3 of them, maybe 4. They have been keeping their distance, but they are definitely following." His voice was calm, but his eyes scanned the darkening landscape looking for options. "There is a lined shack about a mile east of here, built into the rocks. We can hole up there for the night, make them come to us on our terms if they are looking for trouble." They left the main trail and picked their way across the rocky ground toward the shack Samuel had mentioned. It was little more than 4 walls and a roof, built by ranchers as a shelter for cowboys watching over cattle during the winter months, but it had a solid door and small windows that could be defended. They reached it just as full darkness fell, and Samuel quickly got the horses inside before barring the door. "You think it is them?" Delilah asked, her voice shaking slightly despite her efforts to stay calm. "I do not know. Could be just other travelers heading the same direction." but I am not taking chances with your life." He checked his rifle and pistol again, then positioned himself at one of the windows where he could watch the trail. "Get some sleep if you can. I will keep watch." "I cannot sleep knowing you are standing guard all night. Let me take a turn watching." Samuel turned to look at her, seeing the determination in her face. She had already proven herself capable of surviving on her own. It would be insulting to treat her like she needed to be protected from everything. "All right. I will take first watch. Wake me in 4 hours and I will take over." But neither of them slept much that night. They took turns at the window, watching the darkness and listening to every sound. The riders, if they had indeed been following, did not appear, and when dawn broke cold and clear, the landscape was empty except for a pair of antelope grazing in the distance. They made it back to Samuel's ranch by mid-morning, and both of them felt the tension ease as the familiar cabin came into view. Over the next week, they fell back into their routine, but something had changed between them. The near threat on the road had made them both acutely aware of how much they had come to mean to each other in such a short time. Samuel found excuses to be near her, to touch her hand when passing her something, to stand close when they were working together. Delilah responded in kind, her fingers lingering when their hands met, her eyes seeking his across the room. One evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, Samuel finally gave voice to what had been building between them. "Delilah, I need to tell you something." She looked up from the sewing in her lap and the firelight caught in her eyes. "What is it?" "I have been alone for a long time. I told myself I preferred it that way, that I did not need anyone. But then you showed up on my porch, half frozen and running for your life, and everything changed." He moved from his chair to kneel beside hers, taking one of her hands in both of his. "You have only been here a short time, but I cannot imagine this place without you now. I cannot imagine my life without you. I know the timing is complicated and you have got troubles that need settling, but I need you to know how I feel." Delilah's breath caught in her throat. She had felt the pull between them growing stronger every day, but she had been afraid to acknowledge it, afraid that wanting something good would somehow curse it. "Samuel, I feel it too, but I am scared. Everything good in my life has turned bad eventually. What if I bring that curse to you?" "There is no curse except the one we create by being too afraid to reach for happiness. I'm not saying this will be easy. Your past needs dealing with, and we barely know each other in some ways. But I know the important things. I know you are brave and strong and kind. I know you make me want to be a better man. I know that when I think about the future, all I see is you." He brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I am falling in love with you, Delilah Ramsey. Actually, I think I have already fallen." Tears spilled down Delilah's cheeks, but they were tears of joy, not sadness. "I am falling in love with you too. I have been trying not to, trying to protect both of us, but it is no use. You opened your door that night and you opened your heart, and somehow you opened mine too." She slid from the chair to kneel with him on the floor, framing his face with her hands. "I do not know what the future holds, but I know I want to face it with you." Samuel kissed her then, a soft, gentle kiss that held all the tenderness and promise of new love. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling, and the cabin seemed to glow with warmth that had nothing to do with the fire in the hearth. 2 weeks passed before they heard from Marshal Whitaker. A rider brought a message asking them to come to Goldfield as soon as possible. They made the journey in good spirits, despite not knowing what news awaited them. Whatever happened with the Hutchins brothers, they would face it together, and that knowledge made even the uncertainty bearable. The marshal greeted them with a satisfied expression that immediately gave Delilah hope. "Come in, sit down. I have news and most of it is good." He spread several papers across his desk. My contact in Virginia City, Deputy Frank Morrison, is a good man who has been wanting to bring down the Hutchins operation for years. When I sent him a telegram explaining the situation, he was more than willing to help. He got a warrant from a territorial judge, one who is not corrupted by Hutchins' money, and he searched the house where Marcus Hutchins lived. What did he find? Samuel asked. Ledgers documenting years of illegal activity, claim jumping, theft, bribery of local officials, even evidence suggesting involvement in several unsolved murders. It is enough to bring federal marshals into the territory and open a full investigation. The marshal looked at Delilah with sympathy. There is also documentation about your marriage and your husband's history of violence. Deputy Morrison interviewed neighbors who confirmed the abuse. Your self-defense claim is ironclad, not that it was ever really in question legally. Relief flooded through Delilah so powerfully that she felt dizzy. What about Garrett and Thomas Hutchins? Will they be arrested? Already done. Federal marshals moved in 3 days ago and took them into custody. They are being held in Carson City awaiting trial. Given the evidence, they will be going to prison for a long time. Marshal Whitaker leaned back in his chair. You are free, Miss Ramsey. You can stop running. Delilah started crying, great shaking sobs of relief and release. Samuel pulled her into his arms, holding her tight while she let out all the fear and tension she had been carrying for so long. When she finally calmed, she looked up at the marshal with red-rimmed eyes. Thank you. I do not know how to thank you enough. No thanks needed. This is what the law is supposed to do, protect people and bring criminals to justice. I am just glad we could make it work this time. He stood and shook hands with both of them. You folks have a good life. You have earned it. They left Goldfield in the late afternoon, and this time there was no fear of being followed, no looking over their shoulders. The weight that had been pressing on both of them was gone, and they rode through the winter landscape with light hearts. When they reached the ranch, Samuel helped Delilah down from her horse, and instead of releasing her, he held her close. Marry me, he said, the words coming out in a rush. I know it is fast and maybe I should wait and court you properly, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. Marry me, Delilah. Build a life here with me. Wake up beside me every morning and fall asleep in my arms every night. Let me love you the way you deserve to be loved. Delilah's heart felt like it might burst from happiness. Yes, yes, I will marry you, Samuel Brennan. I cannot think of anything I want more. He kissed her then, deeper and more passionate than their first kiss, a kiss that held promise and desire and commitment. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Samuel grinned. Should we go back to town tomorrow and find a preacher? Tomorrow sounds perfect. They were married the next day in Goldfield by a circuit preacher who happened to be passing through. Marshal Whitaker and his wife served as witnesses, and Martha Chen from the general store insisted on hosting a small wedding supper at her establishment. It was simple and quick, but it was real, and when Samuel slipped a plain gold band onto Delilah's finger, she felt like the luckiest woman alive. Their wedding night was everything Delilah had dreamed a wedding night should be. Samuel was gentle and patient, erasing the bad memories of her first marriage with tenderness and passion that left her breathless. They lay tangled together afterward, the cabin dark except for the dying glow of the fire, and whispered about their dreams for the future. I want to expand the herd, Samuel said, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. Maybe get some chickens so we can have fresh eggs. Plant a bigger vegetable garden in the spring. I want to make curtains for the windows and sew new quilts for the bed. Maybe I could take in some sewing work from the miners' wives in town, earn a bit of money. She tilted her head to look at him. And someday, when we are ready, I would like to have children, a family. I would like that too, Samuel said softly. I always thought I would grow old alone out here. Now I cannot imagine anything better than growing old with you, watching our children grow up in this place we are building together." The winter passed, and spring came to the high desert with an explosion of wildflowers that painted the landscape in brilliant colors. Delilah planted her garden, working the soil until her hands were calloused and strong. Samuel expanded his herd, buying calves from ranchers further south and nursing them through the early weeks until they were strong enough to join the rest of the cattle. They worked side by side during the long spring days, and at night they retreated to their cabin, to their bed, and to each other's arms. In May, Delilah realized she was pregnant. She told Samuel one evening after supper, watching his face carefully to gauge his reaction. For a moment he just stared at her, and then a slow smile spread across his face that made her heart soar. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" she asked, though she could already see the answer in his eyes. Happy does not begin to cover it. He pulled her into his lap and kissed her thoroughly. "When? Late autumn, I think. October or November." She nestled against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I am a little scared, but mostly I am just excited. We will figure it out together, just like we figure out everything else." Samuel's hand rested on her still flat stomach, and the gesture was so tender it brought tears to Delilah's eyes. The summer was busy as they prepared for the baby's arrival. Samuel built a cradle from pine wood, sanding it smooth and carving simple designs into the headboard. Delilah sewed tiny gowns and blankets, her needle flying through the soft fabric as she hummed to herself. They talked about names, debating options and laughing over some of the more ridiculous suggestions they came up with. In early October, Delilah went into labor. Samuel rode hard to Goldfield to fetch the doctor, a young man named Henry Carlson who had recently set up practice in town. The labor was long and difficult, lasting nearly 20 hours, and Samuel paced outside the bedroom like a caged animal, nearly wearing a path in the wooden floor. Finally, just before dawn, he heard the thin, indignant wail of a newborn baby. Dr. Carlson emerged a few minutes later, wiping his hands on a towel and grinning. "You have a son, Samuel. A big, healthy boy. Your wife did wonderfully." Samuel burst into the bedroom to find Delilah propped up on pillows, exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in one of the blankets she had sewn. He approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at his son's red, wrinkled face. The baby had dark hair like both his parents and was making small snuffling sounds as he rooted against Delilah's chest. "He is perfect," Samuel whispered, reaching out to touch one impossibly tiny hand. The baby's fingers curled around his, and Samuel felt something shift and settle deep in his chest, a love so fierce and overwhelming it almost brought him to his knees. "We made him," Delilah said softly. "We made this perfect little person." They named him Thomas, after Samuel's father, and from the moment he entered the world, he changed everything. The cabin rang with his cries and gurgles, and both Samuel and Delilah discovered depths of exhaustion they had never known existed. But they also discovered joy in the smallest things. Thomas's first smile, the way he gripped their fingers, the contented sounds he made while nursing. As Thomas grew, the ranch prospered. Samuel's reputation as a fair dealer and skilled cattleman spread, and he found himself able to sell his stock for good prices. They added more land to their holdings, expanding slowly but steadily. Delilah took in sewing from the growing population of Goldfield, and discovered she had a talent for designing dresses that the miners' wives loved. She saved her earnings carefully, and after 2 years, she was able to buy a proper sewing machine from a catalog, a treasured possession that made her work easier and faster. When Thomas was 3 years old, Delilah became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and in the spring of 1885, she gave birth to a daughter they named Rose. If Thomas had been an easy baby, Rose was his opposite, crying at all hours and refusing to sleep unless she was being held. Samuel spent many nights walking the floor with her, singing old trail songs in his deep voice until she finally settled. 2 years after Rose came another son whom they named Jacob, and 2 years after that, a second daughter they called Margaret. The cabin that had once seemed spacious with just Samuel now overflowed with life and noise and love. Samuel expanded it twice, adding more bedrooms and a larger kitchen where Delilah could work her sewing projects while keeping an eye on the children. Through all the busy years of raising their family, Samuel and Delilah's love for each other never dimmed. They still made time for each other, stealing moments alone when they could, communicating with glances and touches that spoke volumes. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Samuel surprised her with a trip to San Francisco, leaving the children with Marshall Whitaker's family for a week. They stayed in a real hotel, ate in fancy restaurants, and walked along the waterfront holding hands like newlyweds. It was magical and romantic, and when they returned home, both of them felt renewed and refreshed. As the children grew, they each developed their own personalities and talents. Thomas had his father's calm steadiness and love of the land. By the time he was 10, he could ride and rope almost as well as Samuel, and he spent every free moment working alongside his father with the cattle. Rose inherited her mother's creativity and her father's determination, a fiery combination that kept her parents on their toes. She had opinions about everything and was not afraid to share them, much to Samuel's amused exasperation. Jacob was the dreamer of the family, always with his nose in a book or staring off into the distance imagining adventures. And Margaret, the baby, was pure sunshine, laughing and dancing her way through life with an infectious joy that made everyone around her smile. In 1892, when Thomas was 12, Rose was 9, Jacob was 7, and Margaret was 5, Samuel bought a neighboring ranch whose owner had decided to return east. This doubled their holdings and made them one of the larger ranching operations in the area. It was a risk, stretching their finances thin, but it paid off. Within 3 years, they had paid off the loan and were prospering like never before. Delilah's sewing business had also grown. She now employed 3 women from town who worked under her direction, creating dresses and household goods that were sold as far away as Reno and Carson City. She had a real shop in Goldfield now, run by her head seamstress while Delilah managed the business from the ranch and created the designs. As they approached their 20th wedding anniversary, Samuel and Delilah found themselves in a place they never could have imagined that cold winter night when she collapsed on his porch. They had built not just a ranch and a business, but a family and a legacy. Their children were healthy and happy, their marriage was strong, and they had become respected members of the community. One evening in late autumn, after the children were all in bed, Samuel and Delilah sat on the porch they had built onto the front of the house, wrapped in blankets against the chill. The first snow of the season was beginning to fall, large soft flakes that drifted down through the darkness. "Do you remember the first time it snowed after we met?" Samuel asked, pulling Delilah closer against his side. "How could I forget? I was half dead on your porch, covered in blood and terror, with no idea if I would live to see another day." She tilted her head to look at him. "You saved my life that night, Samuel." "No, we saved each other. I was half dead too in my own way. I had forgotten how to really live, how to feel anything beyond the satisfaction of a hard day's work. You reminded me what it means to love and be loved. He kissed the top of her head. These 20 years with you have been the best of my life. Even with 4 children who never seemed to stop making noise and chaos, Delilah teased, especially because of them. They are proof that something good and lasting came from that terrible night. Every time I look at them, I see our love made real. He was quiet for a moment, watching the snow fall. I know we have talked about this before, but are you happy, Delilah? Truly happy? She turned in his arms so she could look directly into his face. Even after 20 years, he could still make her heart race with just a look. There were silver threads in his dark hair now, and lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun, but to her, he was as handsome as ever. I am happier than I ever dreamed possible. You gave me everything I wanted that night when you asked what I would wish for if I could have anything. A place of my own, a garden, safety, and most importantly, a partner who sees me as an equal. You gave me all of that and so much more. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the snow transform the world into something clean and new. Inside the house, they could hear the faint sounds of Margaret talking in her sleep and the creak of a bed as one of the boys turned over. These were the sounds of home, of family, of a life well lived. As the years continued to pass, the Brennan family became fixtures in the Goldfield community. Thomas eventually took over much of the day-to-day running of the ranch, freeing Samuel to focus on the business side of things and to spend more time with Delilah. Rose shocked everyone by announcing at 17 that she intended to go to college in San Francisco, and both Samuel and Delilah supported her decision, despite the raised eyebrows of some of their more traditional neighbors. Jacob discovered a talent for writing and began contributing articles to the territorial newspaper. And Margaret, true to her sunny nature, became a teacher at the school in Goldfield. Beloved by her students, on their 30th wedding anniversary, the family threw a huge celebration. Friends and neighbors came from miles around to help mark the occasion. Marshall Whitaker, now retired, gave a speech about how he had brought Samuel and Delilah together, conveniently leaving out the part about the wanted brothers and focusing on his role as matchmaker. Everyone laughed, and Samuel and Delilah shared a knowing look across the crowded room. That night, after all the guests had left and the children had gone to their own homes or retired to their rooms, Samuel and Delilah walked out to the porch where it had all begun. The night was cold but clear, and the stars overhead shone with brilliant intensity. 30 years, Delilah marveled. When I knocked on your door that night, I was just hoping to survive until morning. I never imagined I would find this. I almost did not open the door, Samuel admitted. I heard that sound and my first instinct was to grab my gun and be cautious. But something made me put the gun down and just open the door. Best decision I ever made. Mine too. Delilah leaned against him, still fitting perfectly into his embrace after all these years. Do you remember what you said to me that first morning, when I asked why you were helping me? I said maybe I was tired of being alone. Maybe I saw someone who needed help and I had the means to give it, and maybe some things were worth fighting for and you were one of them. Samuel smiled at the memory. I meant every word, but I had no idea just how true it would turn out to be. We have had a good life, Samuel Brennan, the best life, and we are not done yet. We still have years ahead of us, years to watch our grandchildren grow up, years to sit on this porch and count our blessings. He turned her to face him, cupping her face in his calloused hands. I love you, Delilah. I have loved you since that first night, and I will love you until my last breath. And I love you, Cowboy. You opened your door and your heart, and you gave me everything. She kissed him then, a kiss that held 30 years of love and partnership and shared dreams. They stayed on the porch for a long time that night, wrapped in blankets and each other, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead. The cold wind that had once brought Delilah to Samuel's door now seemed like a benediction, a reminder of how far they had come and how much they had built together. As they finally went inside, Samuel paused at the door and looked back at the porch where he had found her all those years ago. He could almost see her there, shivering and desperate, not knowing that she was about to find not just shelter from the storm, but a home and a love that would last a lifetime. He smiled and closed the door behind them, shutting out the cold and holding tight to the warmth they had created together. Inside their bedroom, they settled into the bed they had shared for 3 decades, fitting together as naturally as breathing. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new joys, but tonight they were simply Samuel and Delilah, the cowboy and the woman he had rescued, who had rescued him right back. They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, content in the knowledge that they had found what every person searches for and so few find: true and lasting love. The years that followed were golden ones. Thomas married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring spread and gave Samuel and Delilah their first grandchildren, twin boys who were every bit as wild and energetic as their father had been. Rose graduated from college and returned to Nevada as one of the first female lawyers in the territory, taking on cases that protected women's rights and fighting injustice wherever she found it. Jacob published his first novel at 25, a sweeping tale of the Old West that drew heavily on his parents' story, though he changed the names and details enough that only the family recognized it. Margaret married the new doctor in Goldfield and divided her time between teaching and helping her husband with his practice. Samuel and Delilah settled into the rhythms of grandparenthood with joy. Their house was frequently full of grandchildren, and they loved every noisy, chaotic moment. Samuel taught the boys to ride and rope, passing on the skills that had sustained him throughout his life. Delilah taught the girls to sew, though she made sure they also learned to read and write and think for themselves. The lessons she had learned from her own difficult first marriage, she was determined that her granddaughters would never need to depend on a man for survival the way she once had. On a spring day in 1909, Samuel and Delilah sat on their porch watching their family gathered for Sunday dinner. Thomas was playing horseshoes with his sons while his wife helped Margaret set the table. Rose had brought her latest beau, a mining engineer who seemed both terrified and entranced by her fiery personality. Jacob sat under a tree reading his latest manuscript to a rapt audience of younger cousins. It was a scene of such perfect domestic happiness that both Samuel and Delilah felt their throats tighten with emotion. "We did good," Samuel said softly, taking Delilah's hand. "We did very good," she agreed. "Better than I ever dreamed possible. Do you ever think about that night? The night you showed up on my porch, all the time. How could I not? It was the night my real life began." She squeezed his hand. "Everything before that was just surviving. Everything after has been living." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, hands clasped, watching their legacy play out before them. The ranch that Samuel had carved from the harsh Nevada landscape now sprawled across thousands of acres. The simple cabin where Delilah had taken shelter had grown into a sprawling ranch house that could accommodate their large family. But more important than any of the material success was the love that had started it all. The love that still burned as brightly as it had 38 years ago when a desperate woman collapsed on a porch and a lonely cowboy opened his door. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, the family gathered around the long table for dinner. There was laughter and good-natured arguing, stories told and retold, the comfortable rhythms of a family that loved each other deeply. Samuel sat at one end of the table and Delilah at the other, and they caught each other's eyes frequently, sharing silent communications that needed no words. After dinner, as the younger children played in the yard and the adults sat on the porch talking, Samuel pulled Delilah aside. "Dance with me," he said, even though there was no music. "There is no music, you old fool," Delilah said, but she was smiling. "I will hum. Come on, humor an old cowboy." He pulled her into his arms and began to sway slowly, humming an old tune he had learned on the cattle drive so many years ago. Delilah relaxed into his embrace, following his lead as they moved together on the porch where their story had begun. Around them, their family watched with soft smiles, understanding that they were witnessing something special, something that went beyond the moment to encompass decades of love and partnership. "Thank you," Delilah whispered against Samuel's chest. "For what?" "For opening the door. For opening your heart. For giving me this life, this family, this love. For everything." She pulled back enough to look into his face. "I was shivering on a snowy porch with nothing but fear and desperation, and you gave me the world." "You gave me the world right back," Samuel said, his voice rough with emotion. "Every single day with you has been a gift, Delilah Brennan. Every single one." They continued to dance as the stars came out overhead, lost in their own world even as their family watched and smiled around them. The cold wind that blew down from the mountains carried with it the promise of another winter. But Samuel and Delilah felt only warmth, wrapped in each other's arms and in the love they had built together. When they finally stopped dancing and rejoined the family, their youngest grandson, a boy of 7 named Samuel after his grandfather, tugged on Delilah's skirt. "Grandma, tell us the story about how you and Grandpa met." The other grandchildren immediately chimed in with their own requests. It was a story they never tired of hearing, even though they had heard it dozens of times. Delilah looked at Samuel, and he nodded encouragingly. She settled into her rocking chair with little Samuel on her lap, and the other grandchildren gathered around her feet. "It was a cold December night in 1881, she began, and I was running for my life through the Nevada wilderness. I had been running for days, and I was so cold and tired I did not think I could take another step. Then I saw a light in the distance, coming from a small cabin in the middle of nowhere. I made my way to that cabin and I knocked on the door, though I barely had the strength left to do it. And then the door opened, and there stood your grandfather." "What did he do?" one of the girls asked, even though she knew the answer. "He caught me when I fell. He brought me inside and warmed me by his fire. He fed me and gave me a safe place to sleep. He asked for nothing in return except the chance to help someone in need." Delilah's eyes met Samuel's across the porch, and then he did something even more important. He opened his heart and taught me that it was safe to love again. He showed me that not all men are cruel, that some men are kind and good and true. "And Grandpa fell in love with Grandma right away," piped up another grandchild. Samuel chuckled. "That I did. The moment I saw her, even half frozen and scared, I knew my life was about to change. And I was right. She changed everything, made everything better. We built this ranch together, raised our family together, and created a life that has brought me more joy than I ever knew was possible." The grandchildren listened raptly, as they always did, enchanted by the romance of their grandparents' story. As the evening wore on and the children grew sleepy, the family began to drift away. Thomas and his wife loading their brood into their wagon, Rose driving off in her automobile, Jacob and Margaret and their families heading back to town in their respective conveyances. Finally, Samuel and Delilah were alone again on their porch. Samuel banked the fire in the hearth while Delilah blew out the lamps, and then they made their way to the bedroom they had shared for nearly 40 years. They prepared for bed with the ease of long practice, moving around each other in the comfortable dance of a couple who knew each other inside and out. As they lay in bed, Delilah nestled against Samuel's side, her head on his chest and his arm around her shoulders. "Do you remember what I told you I wanted, that first week when you asked me what I would wish for?" Delilah asked sleepily. "You said you wanted a place of your own, a garden, the ability to wake up without fear and go to sleep without nightmares. You wanted to matter to someone, to build something real with a partner who saw you as an equal. You gave me all of that and so much more. You gave me 4 beautiful children and now a whole flock of grandchildren. You gave me respect and partnership. You gave me love that has never wavered even when times were hard. You gave me everything, Samuel. And you gave me a reason to live instead of just survive. You filled this house with life and love. You made me better than I was." He kissed the top of her head. "I would do it all again, Delilah. Every single moment. I would open that door 1,000 times if it meant finding you." They drifted off to sleep in each other's arms, just as they had done thousands of times before and would do thousands of times more, God willing. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters and whistling around the corners of the house. But inside, all was warm and peaceful. Samuel dreamed that night of the past, of that snowy December evening when his entire life had changed with the simple act of opening a door. In his dream, he saw Delilah as she had been then, young and scared and desperate, and he saw himself reaching out to catch her as she fell. But this time, when he looked at her face, he saw not just the frightened woman she had been, but also glimpses of the strong, confident woman she would become, the mother she would be to their children, the grandmother who would spoil their grandchildren, the partner who would stand beside him through decades of joy and sorrow. He woke just before dawn to find Delilah already awake, watching him with a soft smile on her face. "Good morning, Cowboy," she said, using the nickname she had given him all those years ago. "Good morning, love," he replied, pulling her closer. "What are you doing awake so early?" "Just thinking about how lucky I am, how lucky we are." She traced the lines of his face with gentle fingers. "We have been blessed, Samuel, more than most people ever get to be. That we have." He captured her hand and brought it to his lips. "And the blessings are not over yet. We still have time, you and I. Time to watch our grandchildren grow, time to see what our children accomplish, time to sit on our porch and grow old together." And they did have time, years of it. They celebrated their 40th anniversary, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. They saw Nevada achieve statehood and witnessed the slow taming of the wild frontier they had known in their youth. They watched as automobiles became common and electricity came to Goldfield, changing the character of the town but never quite erasing its rough and tumble spirit. Through it all, their love remained constant. They had weathered storms both literal and figurative, faced hardships and celebrated triumphs, but through everything, they had each other. The cowboy who had opened his door on a snowy December night and the woman who had collapsed on his porch had built something rare and precious. A love that lasted, a family that thrived, and a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. On their 50th wedding anniversary, the family threw another grand celebration. The ranch house and grounds were packed with people, 3 generations of Brennans along with friends and neighbors who had become like family over the years. There were speeches and toasts, laughter and a few tears, and through it all, Samuel and Delilah sat together, hands clasped, watching the fruits of their love surround them. As the sun set on that perfect day, Samuel took Delilah back to the porch where it had all begun. He pulled her into his arms, and they danced again, moving slowly to music only they could hear. Around them, their family watched with love and admiration, understanding that they were witnessing something extraordinary. A love story that had spanned 50 years and counting. A love that had started with an act of compassion and grown into something beautiful and enduring. 50 years, Delilah marveled as they swayed together. Half a century since you opened that door. Best decision I ever made, Samuel said, echoing the words he had spoken so many times over the years. Opening that door, opening my heart, taking a chance on love, best decision of my life. Mine too, Delilah agreed. I was shivering on a snowy porch, alone and terrified, and you opened the door and gave me everything. You gave me love and family and a life worth living. You gave me hope when I had none. You gave me your heart, and I have treasured it every day since. They stood together on the porch as the stars came out overhead, surrounded by the life they had built together. The Wild West they had known in their youth was fading into history, but the love they had forged in those hard times remained as strong as ever. They had opened their hearts to each other on a cold December night 50 years ago, and they had spent every day since building something beautiful and lasting. As they finally went inside for the night, Samuel paused at the door one last time and looked back at the porch. He thought about that night so long ago, about the frightened woman who had collapsed into his arms, about the lonely cowboy who had opened his door and found his destiny. He thought about the children they had raised and the grandchildren who carried on their legacy. He thought about the decades of love and partnership, of hard work and shared dreams. Thank you, he whispered to the universe, to God, to whatever force had brought Delilah to his door that snowy night. Thank you for this life. Thank you for this love. Then he closed the door and followed Delilah to their room, to their bed, to the warmth and comfort of her embrace. They had been given a gift that cold December night, the gift of finding each other, and they had spent 50 years honoring that gift with lives well lived and love generously given. As they fell asleep in each other's arms, both of them smiled, content in the knowledge that they had found what so few people ever find: a love that transforms, a partnership that endures, and a happiness that lasts a lifetime. The cowboy had opened his door and his heart, and the woman shivering on his snowy porch had walked in and changed his world forever. It was a love story for the ages, born in the Wild West and lasting far beyond those rough frontier days, a testament to the power of compassion and the enduring nature of true love. Their story would be told and retold through the generations, inspiring their descendants and reminding them that sometimes the simple act of opening a door in kindness can change everything. Samuel and Delilah Brennan had built more than a ranch or a family. They had built a legacy of love that would echo through time, a reminder that even in the harshest circumstances, love can bloom and flourish and last forever.